So, hi everybody, I am Deb Keuhner, and I want to talk to you first of all just a little bit about why I'm here. My experience is vast, as you heard, starting out as an art major, and then social work, and then into education where I currently have landed. However, about 2.5 years ago, God planted a very big idea in my heart. My daughter-in-law had been to India working in Calcutta with women who had been rescued out of human trafficking. And when she came to talk to me about it, she just kind of sparked my interest, and I'll share a little bit more about why that was so interesting to me in a few minutes. But as she was talking to me about her experience, I was like, well, what is human trafficking? You know, I mean, it was a new term for me, believe it or not, just a few years ago, because we know, I mean, almost everybody's heard of it here, right? You all probably have some knowledge of it. But back when she first started talking to me, I was like, I don't even really know what that means. And so I started to research, only to discover that it was a bigger problem here in the United States than I had ever imagined. And it broke my heart. And that first year, I just really started to read everything I could get my hands on. I was researching, I was listening to webinars, and I said to my husband, we need to open up a safe house for girls who've been trafficked, for minor victims. And my husband's a pastor, and we have been together for a long time, so he knows that I am like, woo! And he's like, settle down, you know, let's pray about this, let's see if this is really where God's, because I saw a house that my brother had listed, and I was like, that's the house, we need to buy it, like right now. And he's like, settle down, let's figure this out. So for that first year, I really just prayed and researched and tried to figure out what to do with this vision that God had given me. And to be perfectly honest with you, I was pretty scared because I knew that he was calling me to something that I wasn't prepared for. I have been a middle school teacher for, I think this is my 9th year at that school, and I love this environment because I have about 26 years of working in youth ministry, so you guys are just kind of a step above that. So this is comfortable to me. I was telling them earlier that when I walk into a church to talk about what we're doing on a Sunday morning and they put a cassette tape into the player, I'm like, oh, this doesn't feel quite right to me, but that's okay because it's all good. Anyway, so I just continued to research, and I finally got to the place where I knew that I had to take a next step, but I had no idea what that step was. So I said, okay, God, what do I do today? And I felt led to contact a woman that I found on the internet. When I told my mom I was going to call her, she's like, how do you know she's not a serial killer? That's just my mom. So I called this lady. She is the director of human trafficking of the Human Trafficking Task Force for Western New York. And I was like, we have a task force for human trafficking for Western New York? I had no idea. So we drove up to Hamburg, which is near Buffalo, to meet with this lady, and she totally blew it out of the water for me. She said, it happens in every small town, in every town in America. Every town. It's not just the big cities, it's not just, you know, New York City and Boston or Rochester or, you know, Syracuse or Buffalo. It's Binghamton, it's Vestal, it's Corning, it's Elmira. It's all of those towns. In fact, in our area, recently, we've seen it happen in some of our smallest communities. And it looks very different than it does when you think about human trafficking in New York City or, you know, a bigger city. 3 girls from one of our local schools were trafficked by their parents so that they could support their drug habit. The youngest was 3, the oldest is 16. And so when you start learning about what it is, you can't not do something. You know, it's like God's breaking your heart for what breaks his, and you can't not do something. So as I continued to figure this out, met with a couple of other people and started to form a group of people who would walk with me on this journey. And that's been just an amazing thing. God has provided us with an incredible board of directors, finance people that know way more than I do about money, thank God. And we were given 5 acres of land to build a house. And the guy who's building our home is one of the best home builders in our region. Like, he's the guy that builds the homes that are $2.5 million. You know, he's not building the 50, 60,000, not that you can anymore, now I'm really dating myself, to build a house. But he is really the cream of the crop, and he is going to build this house for us and not charge us for his services to build the house. So far we've raised about $415,000 in cash and in-kind donations, and it's just awesome what God is doing. And every day I wake up and I say, okay, God, what is it today that you would have me do for you? So when Ian called or emailed and said, hey, we'd like you to come and talk about what love is, I was like, okay, I thought I was just talking about my ministry, but I'll do my best, so bear with me. You heard that my husband and I started dating in the 10th grade. And he is my rock, other than Jesus, of course, but my husband is my best friend, and he's a big goofball. My daughter's sitting back there, she can attest to that, but he makes life fun. Anyway, but life wasn't always so grand. I just want to share a couple of things that a friend of mine, when I asked her, when we were talking at our board meeting, and I said that I had to do this, and I said I'm a little stressed out about it, she kind of wrote down some of her experiences. And the top says, what is love? And she said, I have a very clear memory of my dad coming into my room when I was about 2 years old and saying, I love you, but I have to leave. He never came back. When I was about 12 and was being beaten up by my stepdad on a pretty regular basis, who happened to be a doctor and managed to keep up all the right outside appearances, my mom would say to me, your dad really does love you. He just doesn't know how to express it. My mom lost her mom at age 3 and grew up with an abusive alcoholic father. As a result, her definition of love was seriously screwed up. And I think a lot of us can identify with having kind of a messed up idea of what love is. When I met my husband in 10th grade, did I have any idea what love looked like? Absolutely not. Do I now? Sure. It took me a while to get there. So a couple of questions. Back to your question, who was that was asking us to ask questions? We found it really difficult because you weren't really getting anywhere. But anyway, what is God's love? Is God's love protection? Does it mean that you're always going to be protected from pain? Is it security? Is God's love peace? And is God's love unconditional? So as I'm sharing tonight, I want you to think about those things, okay? We are commanded to love, which is an interesting idea, because God tells us that we are supposed to love others. In Matthew 22:37, it says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. So, you know, it's pretty easy to love the people that we like, right? It's a little more difficult to love the people that we don't like. Anyone have a roommate? No, I'm just kidding, don't raise your hands. Before I forget, I'm standing here holding this red marker, and you see that this is on my hand. Just so you know, today happens to be Modern Day Slavery Awareness Day, which is the perfect day for us to be here, because that's exactly what I'm going to be talking about. So I'm going to toss this marker over to you. Hopefully I will have good aim. And you guys, if you'd like to put a red X on your hand so that when somebody sees it, they can say, what's the X for? You can talk to them about either what I've shared with you tonight, or just how important it is for us to be aware of people who are still enslaved in this country, including the girls that we hope to serve someday. Ready, go. Yay, success. Just a big red X, and then you can pass it on. And don't feel obligated, okay? If you don't want to write on yourself, that's okay, because it really is, it's a Sharpie. We're hoping it will last for a week. So back to, you know, loving my husband in the 10th grade. I grew up middle child of 7. Can any of you identify with that? Anybody? And my parents are awesome, but my life back then was pretty difficult. Because I'm being videotaped, I'm not going to identify, but I was a victim of childhood sexual abuse, and so were several members of my family. And as a result, for me anyway, it sent me on this wild ride. When I was in 8th grade, I started to, I went to a school dance one time in 8th grade, and my friend bought this bottle of something, and I was like, oh, that sounds like a great idea. So I started drinking, and I got drunk just about every weekend after that day because I didn't know how to live feeling the pain that I was feeling. I felt shame, I was just feeling a deep hurt and a lot of anger. And so I grew up going to a church, but I had no idea what it meant to have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. So I kind of made my way through life, through high school and early college years, just, lubricating the pain, just numbing the pain. And by the time I was 19 years old, I remember it was my 19th birthday, I was driving home from a bar. I had been with my brother and his fiance, and I drank 44 shots of alcohol. And then I got in my car, and I drove. And I ran a car off the road. I don't even remember it. I don't remember a thing about it. The only thing I remember is standing outside of my car with this state police officer as he's asking me, where are you going, what's your name, touch your nose, walk this line, and I just started sobbing and saying, my father's going to kill me, because I was worried about, a DWI, a DUI. Back then, the drinking age had been 18, and then it got bumped up to 21, and while I was in that phase, it was 21, and I was underage. He was amazing. This man must have had daughters because he had severe compassion for me. And the saddest part is, though, that he let me get back in my car and drive. He asked me where I was going, and I showed him a light down the road, and he kind of followed me down there. You'd think that maybe I would learn my lesson, but I didn't. I went into the house, and by that time I was using other drugs and decided to participate in the drug use that was happening in the house at the time. As you can imagine, I was on a pretty hard, fast, downward spiral. I became pretty depressed and suicidal, and I forgot to tell you, when I was 17, I got in a big fight with my dad and moved out of the house, so I wasn't even living at home. Had just started to reconnect with my parents when I was 19, so I knew that it was not good. My mom and dad were not going to be happy about this. I had never told anyone about what I had been through. I just kind of buried it deep inside and went, and they had no clue. They were like, what is up with this kid? Why is she behaving this way? Why does she hate the world? Why does she hate us? And my husband, when we started dating in the 10th grade, he was just good for me, and I knew that. He was not as messed up as I was, and he loved me for, through that time. But we dated for 2 years, and then I broke up with him because I needed a break. I was like, I just need to get away from you. I need to try some new things. And we were apart for a couple of years, but the whole time we were apart, he was still there for me. And I remember seeing him walking through the mall one day with a girlfriend, and I was like, oh, what? I gotta get him back. That was my motivation, ladies and gentlemen. So after that, we kind of started to connect again, and it was very fast after that. We got engaged, and then a year later, or the next summer, we got married, but we had been friends and we knew each other. We had this relationship. But even on our wedding day, do you think I really knew what love was? Had no idea. I was still living in the dark, to be honest with you. My husband was in the military at the time. We moved over to Germany, and over there, I don't know if any of you know anything about Germany, but the beers are about this big. And so that's what I did to bury the pain when I was in Germany. And it just got pretty scary. There were some really close calls for me as far as being suicidal, and God just had his hand on my life. When I came back from Germany, my first daughter was born while we were over there. When I came back from Germany, I knew that I wanted to get involved helping young people. So I was like, I'm just going to go to the church and ask them if I can volunteer. Still not in a place that I should be working with anybody's kids. But they said yes. So I went to the church and I started volunteering, and while I was there, I took a group of teenagers on a retreat. And while I was on the retreat, there was a 17-year-old girl who talked about how Jesus was her best friend. And her story was like a mirror image of my life. I don't even know her name, but I know that that weekend, without all of the terminology that we use for knowing God and coming into a relationship with Him, people talked about being saved. I thought they were weird. I had no idea what it meant. And I went on this weekend, and after hearing her story, I knew that I wanted what she had, and I just prayed all weekend, and I cried my heart out. And I left that weekend, and I knew that I was different. I went home, and I told my husband, I can't explain what happened, I just feel different. And I was, ladies and gentlemen. It wasn't like I had the knowledge to know what had happened to me. I just knew that I was different because I asked God to come into my life. And so after that time, my husband's kind of looking at me a little funny, like, where did you put my wife? Because he was still kind of in a partying phase. He hadn't, he was a good guy, he was better than me, he wasn't as messed up, but he was still partying, and I had no desire to do any of that. It was like God knew I needed to cut all of those ties to alcohol and other substances and just start over. And He totally took the desire away, which is amazing. So I continued on my journey of trying to know and understand who God is. So the interesting thing for me is that I went from being this messed up person to this new creation, but I still hadn't told anybody about why I was messed up. And it was shortly after I came home from that retreat that I really felt convicted to tell my husband about the sexual abuse from my childhood. And I did. And I was scared because I knew that he was going to want to hurt somebody. And so I shared that with him, and our marriage during that time became a little bit rocky because we were living in different worlds. But I prayed for him every single day to come to a saving knowledge of Jesus. And about 3 years after I came to know Him, my husband came on board, which was awesome because then we could kind of really start living together. That's when we figured out what love is. It wasn't until we knew Him that we could truly love other people. I also knew that in order for me to grow in my faith, I was going to have to forgive the person who had abused me. And that was probably the hardest thing I ever had to do. I had to confront that person, and you don't have to do this. If you have been in that situation, I just want to say that up front. God was telling me that I needed to do that. Like, sit down with this person and say, I forgive you. Hardest thing I've ever had to do. But it gave me so much freedom to be able to just live my life the way God intended me to live it. I have to tell you guys, I used to be like the shyest kid on the planet. And for me to even think about being up here and standing in front of people is just God's mighty hand of transformation, because this is not who I was. He totally changed my life. So Matthew 5:43 says, you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes His sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. And I think about what that means to love our enemies. Only God can help us do that. My friend Michelle, I hope she doesn't mind that I'm sharing this, but right before I got started tonight, she was sharing with me, she was actually in Paris during those recent terrorist attacks. Her daughter lives over there and works in that area. And Michelle was saying that she was actually walking around with a camera and stopped in front of Notre Dame Cathedral, and she was taking pictures because she's a professional photographer, and God told her to put the camera down and pray for the terrorists. After 9/11, my daughter, who at the time was in middle school, I don't know if you guys, I don't know what you remember about that day, but I remember that we were standing in front of our church. We lived in Maine at the time, and we were standing outside holding hands and praying, and my daughter, who was in middle school, said, we need to pray for the people who did this. And I think we forget that sometimes. It's really easy for us to pray for people who are like us, who we love, It's really, really hard for us to pray for those who persecute us, the people who are our enemies. But when we know God, we can learn to love the way that God loves. And I'm going to read to you guys 1 Corinthians 13, and I'm sure you've probably all heard it before, maybe not. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. God is love. So if we read that again, instead of saying love is patient, God is patient. God is kind. God does not envy. God does not boast. God is not proud. God does not dishonor others. God is not self-seeking. God is not easily angered. God keeps no record of wrongs. God does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. God always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. God never fails. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. One thing that I had a speaker do for me one time was to put my name in there. He said, put your own name in there and see how you're doing. It's a bit of a challenge to say, Deb is patient, Deb is kind, Deb does not envy, Deb does not boast, Deb is not proud, Deb does not dishonor others, Deb is not self-seeking, Deb is not easily angered, Deb keeps no record of wrongs, Deb does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. Deb always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Deb never fails. Doesn't work. However, it's something that we can all strive for. So my older daughter, used to work with Youth with a Mission. Any of you guys familiar with that? It's a great organization, and she was a missionary with them for a while. And I remember her coming home for Thanksgiving one year, and she was so fired up about what she was doing and how she was serving. But she said, you know, I heard the coolest definition of love. Love is when we will the highest good for another. So if you think about all the abuses that we have in our society of what love looks like, if we can always think about how we can will the highest good for another person. If I want the best for you all the time, then I truly love you. If I can take away the jealousy or the envy that I carry in my heart and try to always love you the way God designs or desires us to love, that's what love is. Tonight I want to share another story with you. This story is called Out of Darkness, Light. And this is a story of a young girl who is a survivor of human trafficking. I actually got to meet this girl and sit down with her. My daughter-in-law works in a home where she is a director of one of their programs, and this girl is just an amazing young lady, but her story is a story of just the amazing grace that we were talking about earlier. So this is titled Out of Darkness, Light. Sherry was a little girl born with big brown eyes and bouncing curls. She was the fourth child born to her parents, but was the first girl. She was born into a seemingly normal family with 2 parents and 3 older brothers. More often, this girl grows up into a lovely young woman prepared to carve her place in the world. However, Sherry's story was different. Sherry became blind at a young age, and her father didn't want a daughter, especially not a disabled one. Her family had no money, and her brothers were never around. Her mother's mind seemed to live in a dark and distant place, and she offered little guidance. Her father cared more about whiskey and drugs than he did about his family. So too, often, little Sherry was on her own. She would try to search for her parents, someone to feed her and care for her, but even when she did find them, her father would most often snatch her up and throw her in a closet. so that she would stay out of his way. She spent the majority of the first 6 years of her life in that closet. Maybe in some ways it was a blessing that she was blind during these times. The darkness of the small closet might not have been quite as scary. When Sherry was 7, her father found another use for her. It was the most awful and vile thing that a father could do to his little girl. He repeatedly abused and raped her over and over, year after year, until she was 11 years old, at which time she became pregnant. It turned out to be a minor problem for her dad, which he took care of with his large leather boot firmly planted on her back, kicking her flat on her face at the bottom of the stairs and ending the pregnancy. During this time, Sherry's father would also beat her mother daily. Even though her mother wasn't there for her, Sherry loved her and wanted to protect her. After all, it's all she'd ever known. The abuse continued, and her dad often ran out of money to supplement his habits. That's when he discovered another use for his blind teenage daughter. He began selling her to different men for the night. They would pay him in cash or drugs. It didn't matter to him. He would send man after man into her room each night. Then, when he was done using her, he would throw her back in the closet, which locked from the outside. This closet became Sherry's sanctuary. She knew that if she was in there, then she was going to be left alone, at least for a little while. One day, while Sherry was in her closet, she was feeling around through the clothes on the floor, looking for a place to lay her head. Instead, she found a guitar. She had never held or played a guitar, but she discovered that she loved the pretty sound it made when she thumbed her fingers across the strings. The strings would vibrate, and she would listen to the sweet, soothing sound. For the next several years, this sound blocked out all of the other noises. Sounds that used to frighten her were now replaced by the soothing sounds of the guitar. Sherry did not go to school when she could. She loved school. Did go to school when she could. She loved school because it meant that she was not at home. She learned everything she could. She worked on her studies as much as possible, and despite everything, she became the valedictorian of her class and received a full scholarship to college. The blind little girl with the bouncing curls was now off on her own, finally escaping the dark hell that was all too familiar to her. At least this should have been her escape. But every weekend, her father would threaten to beat, rape, and even kill her mother if Sherry did not come home. So feeling that it was her duty, Sherry would go home and face the abuse that she had suffered all her life, not realizing that she finally did have a choice. One Sunday, one of Sherry's friends from school invited her to church. Sherry enjoyed church, and she made friends quickly there. One night after the service, a couple of women leaders asked Sherry about the visible scars and sores on her body. Sherry confided in them out of desperation, sharing her darkest secrets for the first time. That same night, the woman came to her dorm, gathered all of her stuff, and took her to a safe place, the first safe place she had ever been, a 50-acre farm in her home state of Kentucky. Sorry, not her home state, but the author of this article's home state of Kentucky. This story is almost too horrible to be true, but it is. I can tell you this because I recently sat across from Sherry while she shared her story. Today she is a beautiful, healing young lady with a purpose, goals, and dreams. She is writing music and playing her guitar, the same guitar that she taught herself to play on in her dark sanctuary of a closet. Her song tells of hope and redemption. So I just wanted to share with you guys that the night that I met Sherry, I sat with her in a living room after dinner, and she picked up her guitar and she started to sing praise and worship songs to Jesus. And I sat in the corner sobbing, because that's the kind of love that God has for us, that He can take us out of the deepest, darkest pit and pull us into this amazing life of wholeness and just amazing love, amazing grace that we sang about earlier. And I actually have the song that she played, so it's called Beautifully Broken.
That way, I'm not sure what that reason is, but we will never be the same. You took my heart in your hands, and you crushed it and watched it break. You thought that you defeated me, or that I wouldn't be here today, but I am. often think of what life would be like if I didn't spend so much time trying to be perfect and hide who I am. But you'll never see me as more than my imperfections that you pointed out to me, and I will never get back all I lost, but I forgive you because I know that I am beautifully broken, carried through fire, held together